Hi, today we are going to talk about IQ, more specifically about this controversial claim right here that says the average IQ of a gorilla is 90, the average IQ of a sub Saharan African is like 80, feels bad dog food eaters. So, the reason why I want to talk about this claim is because I feel like those claims are being made because of two main reasons. The first one is obviously racism based on the comment at the end, but the second reason I feel like is because of a misunderstanding of how IQ works and how it is measured. So, if perhaps the information is out there and more people understand how it works, then maybe less claims like these will be made. And also at the end of this video, you will be armed with this information so that you can dismantle those claims yourself. Now, when I did my research, I noticed that this claim was made all around the internet. For example, here you can see the average IQ of a sub-Saharan Africa is around 69 to 76. The Koko the gorilla had a measured IQ of about 65 to 75. Or on X, here average IQ for humans is 100. Blacks have approximately 60 to 65. Gorillas have around 80. Just facts, make your own conclusions. I always find it funny when they say make your own conclusions, like they're acting like they're such impartial actors, when in reality, they're choosing facts specifically to push you towards their own conclusion. Now, the last one here that I have is also important to note that Koko the gorilla had an IQ that ranged from 75 to 95 and understood 2,000 words in the English language. Now, this claim right here, we won't touch it because it'll take way too long to try to address it. But here in the post, there are 4 pictures attached, which are IQ of South American countries like Guatemala and African countries like Liberia that have very low IQs. So now the first thing that we need to understand to dismantle this claim is how does IQ work and how is it measured? So IQ in a population is usually distributed like this. So this is called a normal distribution. And the creator or the administrator of those tests, what they try to do is always have the average IQ to be 100. So what they do is they give those tests to a sample population. Then they take the average of the average scores and they say, okay, that average is 100. Then a score that is one standard of deviation higher than the average will be 115, and a score that is one standard of deviation lower than the average will be 85. So every standard of deviation will be separated by 15 points. So here you have 130, 145, and then on the other side you have 70 and 55. So according to a normal distribution, you will have 68% of the population that will have an IQ between 85 and 115. The most important thing to remember here is that there will be different tests for different stages of a human's life. So for example, an infant will take a different test than an adult or a children or a teenager. And that makes sense because we don't want everyone to take the same test and everyone to be part of the same calculation, because all the infants would be on the left side and all the adults would be on the right side. That's not what we want. We want to compare apples with apples. So we give infant IQ tests to infants and adult IQ tests to adults. And usually for adults, they separate it based on age group. So for example, for me, when I did my IQ test, what they did is they say, okay, this is your IQ for your age group like 19 to 25. So the average 100 for the age group 19 to 25 will probably be different than the average 100 for the group like 75 to 90. So now let's look at what Francine Patterson wrote in her book, The Education of Koko, where she describes how she taught Koko's sign language and what she did with Koko. Now, in the book, she said that between 1972 and 1977, she administered to Koko a few IQ tests, and Koko scored about between 70 to 90 IQ. Now, the 2 tests that she administered were the Cattell Infant Intelligence Scale, and the second one was the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test. Now let's look at what those tests looks like. So the Cattell Infant Intelligence Scale here is for children from 2 months to 2.5 years old. Now that's really important to remember. It's not a test for an adult, it's a test for an infant. And this is what it looks like. So as you can see here, you have like cubes, boxes, whatever that is, I think a dumbbell, this, a doll. So basically the questions What they are is usually like take the cubes and put them in a box, or take the triangle and put it in a triangle shaped hole. So it's really simple, really easy, because it's made for infants, not for adults. The second one, the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, looks basically like this.
Look at these pictures on this page. Put your finger on the picture that shows laughing. Good. Put your finger on the picture of sleeping. Good.
So again, very easy. And in the book, The Education of Koko, the author said that many of the early tests require mostly motor responses. Gorillas develop locomotor facilities earlier than human infants do. So that is why it's not a good idea to give an ape or a gorilla an IQ test that was specifically designed to test the IQ of infants, because different animals, different creatures will develop differently. So the only thing you can conclude from those tests is that gorillas are as good at tests that require mostly motor responses than a slow child. Because remember, Koko got 70 to 90, not 100, which would be the average. So 70 to 90 is about the IQ of a slow child. And that should be expected, because there are some things that apes can do better than us, or at least as well as us. So for example, here's a video of a chimpanzee playing ping pong. Or here's a video of a chimpanzee playing a game where there's numbers that flashes, and then he needs to click on the numbers in a numerical order. And what's more is that in the book, the author said that one orangutan once reportedly scored about 200 on that same infant intelligence test. So according to the logic of the people who make those claims, that would mean that that orangutan who scored 200 would be smarter than 99.9% of humanity. Now, obviously, that is not the case, because the test was not an adult test, it was an infant test. So here, as we can see, the main problem is obviously the comparison between a gorilla and a human. That's the main problem. But the second main problem is that they're comparing a gorilla, the results of a gorilla that took an infant test, to the results of a human adult who took a human adult IQ test. And so we can conclude that this claim is completely wrong. Now, I want to spend the second half of this video trying to talk about what this post is trying to imply, because they're not just like giving you facts to make you create your own conclusion. What they're implying is that, well, the reason why gorillas and black people are so similar is because black people are just have inferior genes than white people or other races. And so now let's address why exactly is it that Africa is the continent with the lowest average IQ? Because that's basically where it stems from, those kinds of claims. Now, one of the reasons might be the way that they collect data in Africa. So for example, in a study called Raven's Test Performance of Sub-Saharan Africans, they found that children were tested on porches, in entrance rooms, or under trees by untrained personnel. This runs counter to the official guidelines. So a lot of children in Africa were being tested in conditions that were not appropriate for IQ tests, because usually IQ tests needs to be tested in a room with a trained personnel, and also in a room that is without distraction, so that you can really see the true intelligence, not the intelligence with an added distraction. So in the study, they remove all this data, and they concluded that the IQs would be much higher if you just remove that data, and that would give you about an average 78 IQ average in Africa. Now, 70 in UK norms or 80 in US norms is still about 20 points lower than the average IQ of the population. Now, why is that happening? Now, one of the reasons might be that the smartest people in those countries, they leave and they take visas and go into other countries. So for example, here you can see the stats from the Congressional Research Service of how the top 15 countries for EB immigrants. So an EB visa is usually referred as like an Einstein visa. You have EB1, EB2, EB3, and are usually given to people with exceptional abilities, or people with university degrees, or people who are executives in multinationals. So here you can see, for example, in Nigeria, 469 in 2003, 900 in 2013, and 3,430 in 2023. So if we assume about 1,000 people in Nigeria with exceptional abilities or with a university degree leave their country to go to the United States to have better opportunities, well, we could assume that this might decrease the average IQ. Now, for how much, I don't know. But this is something we can assume as to why it is low. The second reason, the biggest reason, is because of the Flynn effect. So the Flynn effect basically describes the increase in IQ in the last 100 years in all IQ tests. So for example, the Raven's progressive matrices in this 60-year time span has increased by about 28 points, and the other ones by about 24 points, and the other one here 18 points. So now the reason why this is so significant is because 60 years is way too little time for any genetic change to have occurred. So what we can conclude from this Flynn effect is either that the IQ tests are not testing what you think it's not testing raw intelligence, or because the environment has improved so much that it has allowed people to have higher IQs in the countries which have seen those effects. Now, if we take, for example, a country like the United States before the Flynn effect, and we see what is their average IQ, well, for example, in 1932, if we compare the IQs of Americans in 1932, the average IQ, to the values of 1997, they would have an average IQ of about 80. And if we remember the average IQ in Africa, it's 78 to 80. So people in Africa right now, or in 2009 when that study was done, would have about the same IQ as Americans in 1932. And so if we look at all across the world, the Flynn effect gains in mean IQ for world regions where it's separated by continents, we can see all the continents have seen an increase in IQ, and Africa is lagging behind but is still seeing an increase in IQ. So now the Flynn effect, there are three main reasons why this could be happening. The first one is because of education. For example, here in the book Intelligence and How to Get It, the author explains a natural experiment that occurred in Prince Edward County in Virginia between 1959 and 1964, when the Prince Edward County shut down all their public schools because they didn't want to integrate black children with white children. So basically, it says that the IQs of the children who had no schooling during that period diminished by an average of 6 points per year of schools missed. So education has a huge effect on your IQ. And so we can assume that one of the reasons why, for example, in the United States, there's been a huge increase in IQ is because much more children have access to proper education, not because we're getting significantly smarter. And if we look at in Africa, in the study that I mentioned earlier, here it says that from the children that took the tests, 15% did not attend school. Now, if we compare it to the United States in 2018, the percentage of children who did not attend school was 0.57%. Here you have in 2011, 3.6%. And because of COVID, it has increased a bit, but much less than what you see with the 15% in Africa. Fortunately, this is getting better. For example, the global number of children not attending school has declined by nearly 40% since 2000. So that might be why, for example, in Africa, you've seen an increase where more and more children are getting educated. So in the future, we might see, if there's no instability, we might see an even bigger increase in IQ in Africa. Now, the second reason is because of nutrition. And this one is quite obvious. If you have children whose brains are developing and you don't give them all the required nutrients to help that development occur, then when they're adults, they're probably not going to have as high an IQ as a child who was able to get all the nutrients he or she needs. And in 2003, a study found that a significant Flynn effect among children in rural Kenya was because of nutrition. They got better nutrition. Now, the last reason is intellectual stimulation. And this one also is pretty self-evident. For example, if you have a muscle and you give it stimulation, well, it's more likely to grow. And also with the proper nutrients, it's more likely to grow. And so if you give intellectual stimulation to a child's brain, then this will probably improve his or her intellectual capacity. Now, in the United States, how they get their intellectual stimulation is probably by reading books, by going to the museum, by doing intellectual activities, or by going to school, which is very intellectually stimulating. Now, in Africa, what they do, the children, they unfortunately, they work. 92.2 million African children were in child labor. So that's 22.1% of the population. So instead of stimulating their brain, they're stimulating their muscles by working, and that's not improving their IQs. And so if you can bring that number down, then you'll probably see an increase in IQ because they'll be able to do much more intellectually stimulating activities. They'll be able to go to school for much longer, and that will allow them to have a higher IQ when they're adults. To conclude this, a lot of people, when I did my research, a lot of people said that those countries were instability here because they had low IQ. So the people that were making those claims said that because they're genetically inferior, they have low IQ, and that causes the instability. Now, as we've seen, it's actually the opposite. It's the instability that is causing the low IQ in those people. It's the instability that is causing them to not attend school. It's the instability that is causing them to not get the proper nutrients. And it's also the instability that is causing them to not do as much intellectually stimulating activities. So at the end of the day, IQ is not everything, but if we stop glorifying it, or if we stop trying to make weird links between races and IQ, then we could start using that metric as a proxy for education, nutrition, and intellectual stimulation in childhood. So let me know what you think about IQ in the comments down below. Let me know what you think about this whole subject. And also, just to reiterate, this claim is wrong. Thank you for watching, and please like and subscribe. Bye-bye.